is that there are a lot of people who have been doing this for years and years and years and years, and they start what I call up here. And I'm starting down here, and they don't really know how to explain, how do you get the information in between here and here? There's a lot of background context and assumptions about knowing how to do something. If you don't know something, please don't feel foolish asking us to help with that, because that's what we're here for. The main goal of my presentation today is just to get everybody set on the path and prepared to start writing simple automated test code. But it can also be the most difficult part, right? Understanding how these pieces go together and what they do, which is what I'm here to do with you today. I'm not here to teach you necessarily how to write the best automated test suite in the world. I'm here to explain how the pieces that are used to create automated testing go together. At the end of this session, I would much prefer that everybody here is actually able to do something, even if it's just something as simple as installing your dependencies, than getting through the content. So please don't worry about holding things up or asking questions. I usually find that any question that people have is actually valuable to other people as well. So the first thing I'm going to share is where you can follow along. I'm going to put this in the Zoom chat. And then I'm also going, and we'll share more information about the Slack in a second. I'm going to put it in the City Berlin Slack. I'm going to be working off of something that I've been working on developing. It's just a completely open and free course website. It's called training.saucelabs.com. And what we're going to be going through today is the content in module 1. Oops, there's a typo. Setting up your Selenium Python environment. And module 2, we want you to, ideally, we can get to the point where we run a very simple Selenium Python test. However, everything I say today is written down in these 2 modules. So you can kind of go asynchronously to follow along. I will also share the slides out. Today, the way this is going to work for about the first 10 minutes, I'm just going to talk to you about these puzzle pieces that go together to make Python and Selenium test automation. We're going to talk about what these pieces are, ideally get people set up. And then for about 10 minutes, we're actually going to do a breakout room. There's going to be several hosts. The main idea of the breakout room is to, 1, make sure everybody's dependencies are set up so they can keep following along. And 2, I want to get people talking just to introduce themselves real quick so we start feeling comfortable. I would not have been able to learn any of what I know without having a community around me and without feeling comfortable asking questions and learning from other people. It's just not possible to do it any other way. So during that breakout, I'd like people to start to learn to ask questions and make connections. Once we do the first breakout and check that our dependencies are set up, we'll talk a little bit about test strategy. Before you write test suites, you kind of want to figure out what you want to test. Otherwise, it can get real crazy real quick. And we'll talk about what the Chrome driver is. During the second session, we're going to do a breakout to install a Chrome driver, and you will run your first test, ideally by the end of this. If we don't get there, I have it all written down right here, and hopefully you can work on it on your own a little bit later on. So know that we're going to have some nice breaks in here where we encourage you to ask questions of the different people who are helping guide us in this workshop. First, I'm going to copy all of this. Oops, I will copy it from a different window. Join the Slack workspace if you're not in there already. It's a good place to be if you want to ask questions after this meetup is done. So I'm going to put this in the Zoom chat if I can find it. That window always seems to disappear. Yeah. There it is. Okay. So Slack, PyLadies, I'll be posting everything in the channel called PyLadies Slack City Berlin, since this is the Berlin meetup. And I also put a link to this learning course. Okay, so what you need to do, what your job is to do, is to go to training.saucelabs.com, and we're going to find the Selenium Python course. So that's the first window you want to open up. I'm also going to ask that when we are done, that you fill out a form, and this form looks like this. It just has some, you can put a fake email in if you don't feel like sharing your real email. It has some questions that will help us gauge, hey, did you understand it or not? It's the content that I'm going to go through. It'll give you feedback, tell you if you got it incorrect, what the correct answer is. And then there's also some feedback. I didn't fill any of it out, but there's also some feedback for me. How well did this training or did this presentation go, so I can learn a little bit more. Like I said, you can put in your real email address, or you can put in a pretend one if you don't want to share your contact information. Okay, a little bit about me. I've been educating others about technology and writing code for over a decade.
Lindsay, sorry, just 1 second. Are you sharing your screen? Should we be seeing something?
Oh, I wasn't? Oh my gosh, I haven't been. Okay, let me go back a couple spaces. So we talked about the agenda, join Slack. So yeah, there's 2 things that I want you to be following along with: training.saucelabs.com, Selenium Python. Everything that we'll be doing will be from these modules. And then we're going to have a survey at the end that I'm going to ask you all to take. The first part is just some quiz questions, kind of for you to test your knowledge. Hey, what did I learn from this? And then the second part of it has some questions about how did you, what did you think about this presentation? And I will share those with you via Slack, and they're also in the slides right here. But most important is follow along with the Selenium Python course. So sorry about that. Okay, me. I've been educating others about technology and writing code for over a decade. So I'm also a former teacher. Got a development and web certification, and then started writing curriculum and courses on how to code. I've been with Sauce Labs since June 2020 and launched Sauce School Training. Another shameless plug for training.saucelabs.com. My aim is to make test automation accessible to people. I think this is a really interesting field. It's a hard thing to get started in, which is why I'm here with all of you today. My GitHub is Walker Eljo with a 0. My email, if you would like to contact me, is lindsay.walker@saucelabs.com. You can find me on LinkedIn as Lindsay Jo Walker. I'll give the stage to Abhishek if he wants to introduce himself real quick.
All right. Hi, thanks, Lindsay. Hey, everyone. I'm Abhishek. I've been working with backend engineering for like 7-8 years now. I've worked with Python, Ruby, and now I'm working with Go. I'm working at Ecosia. It's the search engine that plants trees. Please check it out if you don't know what it is. Help us plant trees and fight climate change. I'm really grateful for the PyLadies community to give me a chance to contribute back to the community. It feels great to be here. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Abhishek. Next is, these are our facilitators that'll be helping us out in breakout rooms when we have our pauses in between. That's Jessica.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica. I'm a software developer also at Ecosia, the search engine that plants trees. So now you've got 2 reasons to go check it out. I'm a self-taught / community taught developer. I swapped over to tech in about 2018. PyLadies was a huge part of that transition for me, which is why I'm so happy to be here this evening and to support some more folks with their journey into tech and get to know everyone a little bit better. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Jessica. And David will be another one of our facilitators. David.
Nice picture. So hi, I'm David. So I'm a software engineer by day, actually, blockchain developer by night. That means that on my free time, I contribute on a cryptocurrency wallet called Green++. So, my day-to-day work, I work as security engineer, and well, software engineer is focused on security. So I work for a AI company here in Berlin. So we have UX designers to improve their designs and their conversions. So you can follow me on GitHub and see more things about me. Thank you.
All right, thank you, David. Thank you for everyone who volunteered to help us facilitate this. Like I said, my goal is to get everybody doing something. And it's really hard to do that without a community and without mentors, because the context is not always explained. Okay, so moving on. Today, what I wanted to explain, just talk about the automated test environment. Test environment is such a hard thing to set up and understand what everything is doing. I can't tell you how many times I was trying to learn this and everyone says, well, we'll just import this and use it. And I'm like, but what is it doing? What does it do? What does this piece do? What is Selenium doing? Why do I have to have both Selenium and Python and Pytest and Pycharm? And what are all these things? So I'm going to explain so you have some context to start troubleshooting. I find if you explain context, that means when people get stuck, they know what to look up or they know what to ask. It's really hard if you're just confused and you don't know what to ask. So let's talk about what Selenium is. Selenium is an open source tool, browser automation tool. Selenium allows you to send commands that communicate with a browser. And now that means every browser almost that's being used popularly, Safari, Edge, Internet Explorer, Firefox, Chrome. They've decided on a common protocol that called the WebDriver protocol, which Selenium can communicate with. Without Selenium, well, that's not true. It's not true that you can't communicate with your browser, but the Selenium is the piece of the puzzle that allows you to tell the browser to do things. And I'll point out some specific examples of that in a minute. And this is a really good suggestion, I think by Abhishek. Abhishek that said, why do we need automated testing? Well, when you release a new product or feature, let's say you are a cell phone company and you want people to be able to log into their portal. Sure, it works on your machine and it works in your development environment, but you need to make sure that it works on all the devices and browsers people might use it on, all the cell phones, Windows, Mac, all the different browsers they might use on their Windows or Mac or their cell phone, Android, iPhone. I have a OnePlus Pro, which is an Android phone, and let me tell you, a lot of things are not tested on there. I'm one of those people that's constantly sending them requests like, this workout flow doesn't work. I have this operating system and I have this browser, and lo and behold, it gets fixed. So you need to try it out on many, many different things. The old school way, the inefficient way, is to literally have somebody go in, pick up this device and click on it. That's called manual testing in as many environments as you possibly can. You can imagine it slows down the release of features. If you want to be a company that's releasing features on a constant basis, it makes it nearly impossible. The alternative is using something like Selenium. You write code to do those tests for you. You write the code that says, go to this web page, click on this, and check that this exists. As you can imagine, automating this makes it a lot easier for you to quickly test on many, many different browsers, and B, do it automatically. So anytime a new feature is released, anytime you put new code out into the wild, you merge it into your main branch, we can just kick off these tests, and automated code can even create JIRA tickets for you to help solve those problems. So like I said before, Selenium is a browser automation protocol. There was an old protocol that was used with the old version of Selenium called the JSON wire protocol. The new protocol is to be used with all the browsers, and it just allows you to do more things. Technically, it is not a test library. It doesn't actually do tests. What it does is sends the command. It lets you robotically automate your browsers. It's used with a programming language, so you can choose Java, Python, JavaScript, Ruby, C#, and then each language has a separate library that you use to test it. Basically, when you create a Selenium test, you use Selenium commands. You create a WebDriver instance. The WebDriver is your communicator with your browser. Once you create a WebDriver instance to communicate with the browser, you navigate to a web page. You locate usually an HTML element on that web page. You perform an action, type, click, draw. You say, hey, when this happens, what is going to happen on the website? When I type this in the field, what should happen? And you run a test on that. You check to see if what should happen happens. Then you need to run the test and record the results so that people can see if there's a failure, what failed. And then it's really important, and I've heard of people just forgetting this, you actually need to shut it down. You need to conclude the test and say test over, exit out. So let's take a look at this. This is and I'll talk about why this isn't an actual test, but let's take a look at a really simple piece of test code. In this test code, we're using a few things. Notice the imports at the top, import Pytest. It's going to import our testing library. It imports the Selenium WebDriver, and it imports some other Selenium things. The elements in here that are actually Selenium include the part where it instantiates a driver, the part where it quits the driver. So notice that these are just things that have to do with communicating with the browser. And the things that say, driver, go get something, go get this URL. Driver, find this element, type this in there. Find this element, type this in here. Find this element, type this in here. So the pieces of this that are the Selenium, and you'll see similar things in any programming languages look like this. This is our Selenium. It's just communication with the browser. Something else you might want to understand, we're not going to go really deep into this today, is that there is something called a Selenium Grid, and that's actually what Sauce Labs is kind of built upon. Usually you would, when you do it on your local machine, you just say, hey, go get my Chrome browser and tell my Chrome browser to do this. What the Selenium Grid allows you to do is actually send it to several different nodes, which are different machines, and you can run different browsers on the machine. And the nice thing about the Selenium Grid is that instead of just grabbing one browser, opening it and doing things, it allows you to spin up several machines and run those tests in parallel, run several of them at the same time. I don't love this picture, but it was free on the internet, so that's why I used it. So the WebDriver protocol, let's dig a bit deeper into that. It's really just a set of rules for communication between the client, which is you writing the code, and a web browser. How do you communicate with each other? How do you give it commands? Selenium language bindings combine Java or Python code into actions that the WebDriver can understand. Pytest is something different than Selenium, and it's something different than just Python. It's not Java, so there's a typo. It is a Python library or package that allows you to execute Selenium code for the purposes of testing. So that Selenium is not where the tests come in. Selenium is browser automation. Pytest is when where the testing come in, and Pytest allows you to do something called assert, check if a condition is true. And it also gives you capabilities that allow you to, well, once you have run your test, how do we report what happened? That's also very important, is how do we get the output of this? How do we know if it passed or if it didn't? And if it didn't pass, what went wrong? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about our test framework and dependencies. Let's define what a framework is. This word is very confusing, and it took me about 3 months to finally get a good straight answer. A framework isn't just one thing. A lot of times people will call Pytest a framework, but that's not accurate. Pytest is just the testing library or the test runner. The framework consists of several things. It consists of, obviously you have your chosen language that you use with the test. You have Selenium, and then you also have Pytest, which does the assertions, runs the tests, orders which is going to be what run in what order. and reporting. So a framework, as part of these tools that are put together, it includes things that are abstractions for representing test data. Helper methods that help you synchronize it. Usually the way tests work is you have a test that you write, and then you have other pieces that are, this is run before every single test, and this is run after every single test. And PyTest and Python help you create those, that synchronization and ordering of it. Wrapper classes for storing information, and there can even be a REST client so you can work with APIs in your test. Let's simplify this. Let's take a little bit of a step back. This is the way you might connect a framework with the Selenium Grid that execute tests on the Selenium WebDriver. So you have your test. It's written with JUnit or PyTest and Selenium. So you have your test code right here. Then it passes the information to Selenium, the Selenium server just on your local machine, or the grid that can run it in parallel. Selenium communicates with the WebDriver, which is what communicates with the browser. And it actually, every time you send a command, it makes a really big round trip. Our test runner is PyTest. It's a library tool that takes the tests you write along with settings that you have configured in your tests and executes them. It orchestrates them. What order do things go in? How are they run? And what order? Okay. So now comes the hard part. Now that we know what all of these things are, we need to get it on your machine. I'm hoping that this will be able to go quickly. I'm using Homebrew. Homebrew is a software that manages and installs dependencies. In this case, you can see that I'm using it to install Python. pip3 should actually be installed automatically when you install Python 3. We need to install something called a virtual environment. This might also be installed when you install Python. I'm not 100% sure about that. We're technically going to install your testing libraries. This is optional because we're going to use a little bit of a trick later on to install those. One thing that I do ask everyone to do, you might use Visual Studio Code usually as your IDE. I'm going to ask that you install Pycharm because it's made, it works really, really well with the testing framework. It also allows you to use the virtual environment. And in that virtual environment, it'll have the correct version of Python that you want to use. It creates a little sandbox environment. And in that sandbox environment, we're going to install all of these things. So later on, we're going to go in and let's take a look at how we're going to install these. So once you start your project and you have Pycharm installed, a super easy way to install these dependencies in our little sandbox is you create a file called requirements.txt. You list the dependencies you want, and then it will use pip3 to install recursively everything in that. And I'll go over that in a second. Just to take a look at, well, what we took a look at what elements were Selenium. I wanted to show real quick what elements are Python. This is an element of PyTest, and this is an element of PyTest. And what these help do essentially is add in variables at certain times and change those options. And the PyTest fixture helps orchestrate the order of the test. So for now, I think I'm going to say, let's go into breakout rooms. We can introduce ourselves and make sure that we have all of the dependencies installed. You can find the links to all of these dependencies. training.saucelabs.com. So I'm going to go to the home page. If you're on the home page, Selenium Python. And 1.05 has all of these things linked, as well as step-by-step instructions for how to install these things. So with that, Jessica, could you pull us out into breakout rooms?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to click the button now and everyone will be put into the breakout rooms. You should have at least one coach with you to lead the discussion. And you can also return to the main room. I think, Paloma, I couldn't assign you, so I think you might be stuck in the main room by yourself. But maybe you can stay there in case new people are joining. All right, I'm going to click on the button now and it should automatically transfer. Quicker than I expected. I thought it would give us a minute warning or something.
Okay, so it looks like everybody, and I do feel bad for those of you who are on a Windows machine. What my hope is that if we use Pycharm, Pycharm will just sort of set up a little sandbox environment that will be the same for everybody. Even if you are on Windows and you couldn't use Homebrew, really the only dependency is that you have Python 3.8 or 3.7 installed. It should also install pip with that. And I actually have a question for Abhishek. For the virtual environment, do you know if that's automatically installed as part of Python, or is that something you have to additionally install? It is?
It's automatically installed. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it is automatically installed. I think I just had some of these just in case someone didn't have this put in. So essentially, if you have Python on your machine, you're probably just fine. The next thing we're going to talk about is planning a test strategy. And then I'm going to walk you through starting your first test and using some of the code that's on the Sauce Labs training site. Can you see my screen? I'm going to check this out. Can you see my slides? Yes. Okay. Open my notes. And then I have to find my notes and move them where I can see them. Okay. So let's talk about what an atomic test is. And this is just good programming practice. When you write tests, you want them to be atomic. Atomic, if you think of what an atom is, it's one standalone thing that's all on its own. It doesn't need anything else to function. It has everything that it needs to make itself what it is, all in one place. So that's what an atomic test is. It's all on its own. Atomic tests are good. You want them so you can run your tests in any order. Once you really start automating your test code and putting it into what's called a continuous integration tool, you should be able to run them on any order and it should be okay. One test shouldn't have to be run after another or before another for things to work. You can group your tests into suites and say, I want this group of tests to run at this time and this group of tests to run at this time, and it shouldn't mess that up. It makes them easier if you have atomic tests, it makes it easier to group, and it makes it less flaky. Flaky is like your friend who says they'll show up, but maybe they only do 50% of the time. A flaky test has something it's supposed to test. It doesn't always, sometimes it fails and sometimes it doesn't. And there are some reasons why that might happen, especially if that test depends on another test. So what are some features of an atomic test? It tests one thing or single feature that you would have in your software. As an example, it would just check out, it would test the checkout for a shopping cart. Does the checkout flow work? That's the only thing it tests. It doesn't test logging in and checking out. It just checks, sees to see if it's the checkout works. It's autonomous, so it's standalone. A good atomic test gives you a good indication. If it fails, it tells you what is breaking. And that has to do with naming your test well. You have to name your test clicked on checkout button, not just click button, because if it fails, which button didn't click correctly? What happened? And it needs to run every time. It shouldn't be dependent on other tests to run or other conditions. So good atomic tests are autonomous, they stand alone, and they don't require the setup or running of another test. Let's look at an example of this. If you wanted to really check out your checkout flow, you shouldn't have 3 separate tests to do one thing. Let's take a look at this Swag Labs app. It's like a pretend shopping app. We have the page where you log in. We have a page where you go and you shop for your products, and then you have a page where you actually check out. If what you want to do is actually check this page where you check out and buy things, you don't want to have to run separate tests to flow through this workflow. You have to have logged in and put things in your cart to actually check out, but you don't want to depend on other tests. You might have one test that does check the login. You might have the one test that checks how shopping works. But you want your checkout test to do these things on its own. This might end up being kind of a really long, wordy test, because this test will first log in a way you know works. It will choose certain things in a way that you know works, and it will also check it out. This third step will not depend on other separate steps, because if you get a failure and you're saying, well, my failure is my checkout, it's not a good signal. It's not a good signal if this failed, but you don't know why. It could be because these other tests failed. So an autonomous test actually does everything for itself on its own. It will go through that workflow for itself. Ideally, with the right skills, you could use an API call and send the data, right? Instead of having to actually go click through the UI, you could send an API call and say, bring me to the checkout page and make sure these things are in my carts, and make sure that I'm logged in as this person. But if you don't have that skill, you don't know how to do that yet, just create a test that goes through that entire workflow on its own just for that test. We want to make sure that the thing we are testing is failing is actually this page. I'm going to pause here. Are there any questions about this or anything that's confusing or that there seems
Yeah, I have a question. So if there's no API that we can use, that means the atomic will not be possible. Is that correct statement?
It is, but you're going to write some really long, messy code.
Yeah.
So
okay.
you might have one test to log in, and then you might have a test to log in and try clicking on the shopping page. And it does both. Test number 2 does both those things. And then test number 3 checks your checkout page, but it also does everything those earlier tests those earlier tests did in the same test. It's just going to be long and it's going to do a lot of things. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Ideally, you'd use an API call. You'd send a payload saying, I'm logged in as this user and these items are in my cart. If you don't have that skill though, just do all the things, click through all the things, just so that you know what you're testing. You get to a known state in that third page where you know you're testing the checkout. You're not testing the login. Any other questions? Okay, one good way also to make sure you're getting good signals is you name things descriptively. I guess they're not technically classes because that's not the way Python works, but I have different classes. I actually separate it in different directories. I have a page directory, and then I have a test or package. I'm sorry, I have a page package and a test package. The code in each of these, the code and login page contains logic to interact with the login page. The code in this one contains logic to interact with that page. The code in this one actually contains logic that both of these guys use. Then you have separate classes, they're not really classes, but you have separate files. And the login test contains the logic just to test the login page. The dynamic loading test contains logic just to test the page that we call dynamic loading. And then the methods within the tests are long. It's better to name it with a long, complex sounding thing because you're going to see in your console output, test valid credentials failed. If you just had credentials, you don't know what's going on. The longer the name, actually, the better when you're getting signals from tests. Test invalid credentials. Oh, I know what failed. I know what's going on here. Because I put it in the login test file, and I named it well. So that's another good practice to have when you're creating a test suite. Usually with writing code, you don't want to write too much. You don't want to be redundant. But when it comes to names for tests, since you're trying to interpret all these log files, it's important to give descriptive names. As you can see here, here's an example. So this is what I see on my console if I use the Sauce Labs grid and I run this test. It's telling me which tests it's running and if it passed. It tells me it was on a Windows 10 machine on Chrome 87, and I can see, oh, the test for the hidden element passed. The test for the valid credentials passed, and it makes those signals easier to see. Okay, so now I'm going to go through real quick setting up our first test, and it requires a couple things. The most important of which is the Chrome driver. You can follow along with everything that I'm going to do. In 1.06, it tells you how to set up your project using Pycharm. Step by step, do this, and I'm going to do that right now. We are also going to go through 2.05, which is setting up the Chrome driver. And we're going to take a look at our test package. So, well, I'm just going to get started. This is an example test that I have set up. I'm going to create a new one just so you can see what happens. So I'm going to create a new project. I'm going to call it Python Meetup Project. Now, the thing I was hoping about for a virtual environment, it should be installed if you have Python on your machine. You should see a drop down. We're going to use virtual environment. We're using, in my case, Python 3.8, 3.7 should also just work just as well. And we're going to create a new project, a new little sandbox. So see, it's setting up that little sandbox of a virtual environment. So here's my root project file. Notice that there's a folder in here setting up my virtual environment. The first thing we need to do is create a new Python package. We're going to call it tests. This file is automatically created when you create a new package because it's a Python package. And I'm going to refer back to what I am working off of. If I can find my window. Just minimize, there it goes. So we create our virtual environment. Go back there. So we created our virtual environment. We created our location. If you're importing this from one of the samples that I have, you want to get rid of any PyTest cache files that might be in there. And if you have a main Py, we don't need that. We're just creating, we're not creating Python code, we're just creating a test. So I'm creating a new Python file called login test. And we need to create one other thing. And we're going to use something called requirements.txt. And what this allows us to do is just automatically install all of our dependencies. So I believe it's at the top level of your project file. Let me check my example one real quick. So not within the test directory, but within the root of the project directory, we're going to create a new file. It's called requirements. It's a text file where we'll list our requirements, so it will automatically install them for us. And we'll probably want to update the version of Selenium but we'll see how well this works without an update. So in requirements.txt, yeah, I have different versions. We might need to play around with that to make sure we get the correct version of it. I'm going to paste these in. So we're installing these libraries, Selenium 3.14, might want to do 4. Sauce client, which allows you to later on talk to Sauce, the PyTest, and then a couple extra PyTest libraries that allow you to do different things. So you should have something that looks like this. And then we run this command in the terminal at the bottom. We're just installing recursively the things listed in requirements.txt. So I'm going to click on the terminal. Okay, and it looks like I already have all these things installed. So I'm ready to go. So it says right here, you use the terminal. You also have the option to download a zip file or fork and clone your project file. So once we have everything set up, the test directory, a login test file, requirements.txt, and we've installed our requirements, we're going to go into, I'm working Selenium Java. This is just kind of fluffy stuff that you can learn more about. We're going to start with our requirements.txt, make sure it's ready. And we need to install something very important called Chrome driver. I'm going to return to the slides for this. Remember how I talked about before, we need something for Selenium to be able to communicate with our browser. So Selenium is a protocol for how we give commands, but we need a friend called the driver to actually give those commands. I'm running this on my local machine, so I need to make sure my driver, my friend that gives the directions for me, is the correct one installed. And Paloma, how much time do we have left? Just so I make sure we're not going over too far.
1 hour.
Okay. Okay. I'm tempted to do a pause right now to make sure everyone gets their project set up. I'll put the Chrome driver in. So we'll have, and then we'll all get together to get the project set up. So our project is going to require 3 things: a test directory, the requirements file, and we also need a driver. The driver allows us to communicate with our browser. So the next thing I'm going to add in is, we're going to call it vendor. It's one of the typical names. I'm going to create a vendor directory. Let me see how I did it with the other one. Was it a Python package or no? I made a mistake. We don't want it to be a Python package. I'm going to refactor, delete. So we have the test directory, requirements.txt, and just a plain old directory we're going to call vendor. So I need to have a way for my test to talk to my browser. Well, the first thing I need to know is, what kind of browser do I have? So what you're going to want to do, and you also have the option to do this for Firefox if you want to use a Firefox browser. You're going to go in and I believe it's under help. You're going to check which version of Google Chrome you have. It will, and this is one thing that's really annoying, is Chrome will automatically update. And if your driver, the one that's communicating your Selenium commands, won't be automatically updated. So all of a sudden your test will stop working and say, what's going on when you're running them locally? It's because you need to update your Chrome driver. So now that I know I have version 90, I'm going to go Chrome driver. I've checked my Google Chrome version. We're going to download the corresponding version. Or you can just Google Chrome driver. All right. So I need Chrome version 90 because that's the version that I have that I'm going to be testing on my local machine. And I am on a Mac, but as you can see, they have it for all the different types of operating system. Now what I need to do is get my driver into this vendor directory. So I'm going to find my project file. And I believe it is called Python Meetup Project. But where did I put it? Maybe it's in, I'm not sure where I put this, so I have to find it. Sorry about that.
You have a Python meetup project file.
Did you see it?
Yeah. Yeah, it's under package JSON in the list you were just looking.
Thank you.
Python. Yeah, no problem.
Okay. So I'm going to go into, and this is called Chrome driver. There's lots of them. I bet you it is called, no, it's the fourth one or third one that I've installed. So I'm going to think this is what it's called. Max is 64. And this is in. Okay. Let's see if I can move this correctly. It doesn't like that file name. I'm just going to do this physically and pop it in where I know it is. I get lazy sometimes and I just do things in the visual. So Python meetup project in my vendor directory. I'm going to pop it in there. Doesn't seem right. And extract it. So what I would like everybody to get to is the point where they have created a new project. They have a test Python package with a blank login test page. You have a vendor directory with the Chrome driver that is for the version of Chrome, or Gecko driver that is for the version of Firefox that you have in here. And then you have a requirements txt file. So just like I did here, you move the Chrome driver into the vendor directory. A quick note, if you are anything like me, Mac has started coming down on unsigned executables. So the drivers are usually unsigned, but you still want to be able to run them on your Mac to do tests. So you need to disable something called Gatekeeper. So if you get a problem where you install the Chrome driver and you're not able to open it, this one gives me the option to open. You're going to have to run a command in your terminal and give it your password. I did the wrong command. So it'll allow you to run these unsigned executables. You might also have to go into system preferences, security and privacy, and allow apps from anywhere to be installed. So that's something that people run into. I'm going to share these slides with you now, so you all know what to follow, and then we can jump into some breakout rooms.
Lindsay, what's your preference for these breakout rooms? Would you like folks to go back in the rooms they were previously, or do you want
we can just do random ones.
Is there a poll function? Maybe we can also get an idea of how far folks are.
Yeah, in Zoom.
Mhm.
I'm not sure.
Normally there is, but I don't see it on my screen, so I'm not sure if it's just Paloma as host that has access.
Maybe we can just type in chat, like if we have Pycharm set up, like that's one. If we have dependencies installed, that's two. If that's faster.
Yeah, let me create something then quickly. Okay, hopefully. So I've just created a little key for that then with a 1 to 5. 1 being your Python is set up, 2 being Pycharm is installed, 3 being your dependencies are installed, 4 the Chrome driver is already installed, or 5 you already have it running. I've just put the key in the chat as well. And then if people could give us a rough idea of where they're at.
Thank you. You're going to get a failure in your test, and it'll say, I can't find a Chrome driver. I don't know how to communicate with Chrome. I can't do it.
I'm going to go ahead and close the breakout rooms because there were folks in there and now they've left. So I think we can maybe come all back together in the main room. Maybe want to run the poll again quickly. So I will copy and paste those numbers again in the chat. And you all can just let us know how far you are. And if you are still at one of the lower numbers, like we will also be available after this evening session. And I have to say, Lindsay, the documentation on this tutorial is amazing and absolutely beautiful as well. So, you know, don't worry, listen along, have an idea of what we're doing here, and then reach out to us on Slack. And there's always folks in there who are willing to help.
So do you think I should move on a little bit and show everyone how to do their first Selenium Python test? All right. Okay. And to present. Get my notes up. Okay, so we have gotten to the point where we checked our Chrome driver, we set up our project, and then we installed Chrome driver. And if you need to go back, these are the modules. where you can find the step-by-step instructions on them. So we set up our dependencies and drivers. I actually had to click a little thing that showed up at the top right here where it says install requirements as well. So if you see that, click install requirements. This is what your project should look like now. You got your Chrome driver, and we're ready to go. We're going to write our first test. We're going to run your first very, very basic Selenium Pytest code, and all of this is going to be in 2.06. So we created a new file, and I literally just took screenshots of the documentation because that's where I want you to get this from. Just copy and paste it there, and there are also samples so you can look at a GitHub repo. But let's take a look at what we're testing. We are going to run a test on this app that just exists. It's called it's just a website that was created by one of the co-founders of Selenium, and it's just a website here so you can practice writing Selenium commands on things. And probably the most common thing you will write a Selenium test is on a login page. So there's a fake login page. And then I'm going to explain how we use the login page in the test. So you see, we have a login page, and if you inspect it, there's some different elements here. The username has some metadata that says the ID is the username. That's the username field. The password field, I believe, yes, it also has an ID called password. And the login button looks like this. Let's take a look at the code we're going to write against it. So this is what our HTML looks like. What I want you to do, you don't have to take the commented out part. I put that in there just as you go through this course, you create several files just to make it clear where the code goes in these files. So all you need to do is copy. We'll go into login test py. Install. Let's take a look at what we're doing. We're importing Pytest. We need that for our code. I believe the OS class lets us give direction as to where our Chrome driver is. We're using the Selenium web driver, and we're using a command called, or a class called by, and by lets us locate things. It's from Selenium. So let's take a look at what this is. With Python, you don't actually create classes. I've seen versions of this where you create classes for your code, but classes don't work very well. Pytest instead chooses to use something called the Pytest fixture, and this has to do with the orchestration of the test. The things in here, these commands, are wrapped around every single Pytest you run. So anytime you run a test, these things are run before and after it. If you look down here, you see the first, well, I'll call it a test, but there's something missing from this that makes it a true test. Does anyone know what's missing from this that truly makes this a test? Okay. A real test contains an assertion. This does things. It locates things, but it doesn't do the check afterwards. So I truly won't call this a test yet, but it's test code. It's the beginning of test code. So we have our Pytest fixture, and you could have one test here. You could have 40 tests here. You know, they might all have different names. And what's going to happen with the Pytest fixture is it takes this test method and it wraps these things around it. We create a driver. We tell our driver to use Chrome driver to communicate with the browser. So we instantiate a driver to talk to Chrome. And with every single test that you run, we're also going to quit. We're going to add a finalizer, and we're going to quit out of this test. So if we have 3 tests in here, this fixture is used 3 times. In this case, we only really have 1. What this is going to do first, but after it gets everything set up for you with the Chrome driver, it's going to go to the internet.herokuapp.com.login. It's going to find an element by the ID. So that's that by class, by the ID username. Okay, it's this one. It's going to send keys, Tom Smith. Spelled it wrong though. It's going to find the element with the ID password and send the keys super secret password. And it's going to click the login button. So what I want everyone to try doing, I'll give you a couple minutes, simply go into module 1.06, copy and paste this. And we're going to try running the code. What we want to do is make sure, since we're using that Pytest fixture, we want to make sure, and I don't know how to do this in Visual Studio, I apologize for those of you who are using it, but I know that in Pycharm, we want to say we're using Pytest. So you're going to want to go into Preferences. I even have to look at this. Tools, Python integrated tools. And we want to make sure, oh, this is the set to the wrong one. We want to make sure that it's on Pytest. I'm going to hit apply. If you have your driver set up, if you have the package set up the way that this is, the way that you have it is important. Notice that I'm telling it right here to look in the vendor directory and I'm asking it to look for Chrome driver. I should be able to run the command Pytest. Uh-oh, it's happening. Boop, and there we go. It's popping open a Chrome browser and doing the things that I'm telling it to do. So I'm going to give everybody a minute. Yeah, I made a thing. We made it work, and see if anybody else can get that running. It's in 2.06 at training.saucelabs.com in the Python course. We could do breakout rooms too, so people can troubleshoot. And I'm going to ask another question. If you guys have been able to run this, put something in the chat like I got it working or I was able to do it. So we know if there's some people that are in fact able to do it.
so weird. So I did copy the code. I made the configurations, but when I do PyTest, it returns with no tests.
Would you be willing to share to show what your terminal is showing?
Yeah, sure.
Stop my sharing.
So yeah, it's a test, right? And forget it. I know what it is. Sorry, I was inside of the vendor face. Oh, good. Oh no.
Do you see that in the vendor directory where it says PyTest cache? Can you delete that directory?
Yeah. Okay.
I guess try it again. Yeah, but
I
there's
know. I have to get into the tests.
Oh, you should be able to run it from the root directory from the top. You don't have to go into tests. Okay. Scroll to the top of the errors. Let's take a look at what's going on. Did you go into preferences and then set the test in the tools as PyTest?
I did. Testing PyTest.
Yeah.
Anything else? Or maybe I didn't apply. Well, no, we did apply.
And then you did the pip3 install -r requirements.
I did, but I can do it again, just in case.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Did you fork the Selenium course example code?
I did.
Just try deleting that because I think it's getting really confused as to where to go, where it's supposed to go, because there's a bunch of tests in there.
Oh, let me do that. And if I still not working, I'll come back.
Okay.
What's your favorite thing about testing, Lindsay?
I kind of feel a little bit like it's magic that I can operate the browser without clicking on it, you know? I've been wanting to write something that does, I don't know, that like checks all my emails for me or, you know, that can do something cool that's usually really annoying, or, you know, spam back the spammers. I don't know. It's just kind of magic that you can robotically take control of the browsers.
That's actually quite funny. It reminds me of my late grandfather, who I mean, we're talking maybe like 12 or 15 years ago. They used to take great joy in sitting and emailing back spam mails. And that was at the time when, like, you know, you got quite a few, but not maybe as many as you get now. But yes, it was his great delight to sit there and actually email them back.
Like, how are you doing today? What did you have for lunch?
Yeah.
All right, we're here. Ask questions. I bet you if you're having the problem, everyone else is having the problem.
There is a point from Shiva about that the init py is automatically in there when you create a directory.
Yep, that's normal. It should just be a blank file.
I have to say, I find it like kind of magic when you run it and then this browser screen pops up in front of you and then it's just doing all this stuff without you touching anything, and you're like, oh, cool. You know, like not even what it's doing, just the visual of like it doing stuff. It's kind of magic.
Yeah, something real feedback right away. Anybody else able to get anything running? or where are we getting stuck, or what kind of errors are we seeing?
I'm not sure. Could you maybe elaborate on the thing with the init py?
I'm Googling it right now. It's something I noticed that's automatically created when I created a Python package. So it says on Stack Overflow. The init py is, if there's anything that you want executed automatically, anytime that package is executed, you can put it in the init file.
I mean, if it's not there, is it a problem? And if it is there and you don't want it to be there, is it a problem?
It says if you remove init py, Python will no longer look for submodules inside that directory. So attempts to import the module will fail. I think it does need to be there. It just, it helps Python organize things. Here's a good article. Here's a good article on Py.
Awesome. We should scrape the chat later for all these great links that folks have been sharing.
Lindsay or Jessica, as you were having the, you're trying to answer my question, I guess. But what Lindsay was trying to say was that the underscore init, okay, with my understanding with the Python side of it, it is the initial kind of a file, right? It's a dummy .py file, okay, Python file, which usually created when we created any like package or folder directory, right? And but I'm trying to understand what you're relating to that. I think it doesn't communicate anything with that file, right? Because we are trying to, it's a dummy file, but we're going to start creating another new file anyways. So when you open the _init file also, it would be some kind of a dummy like data in it. It doesn't have anything to do with an execution, if I'm right.
Yeah, as far as I know, I haven't used it with any Python code, but it's just something that is automatically created.
Yeah, and what was my understanding with that file? Once it's get created, as you said, as you rightly said, it comes as an initial creation. But I feel with that understanding that there is no usage with it, but we can still remove and start working ourselves. But I don't know. In your slides also with Source Labs, I don't see any init file in it. But when I could see the live creation of like from live demo of your workshop, I can see there is a _init file in your folder section, but in Source Lab there is not such thing there actually.
Yeah, I might have removed that when I.
Well, we lost your sound, I think, Lindsay.
Yeah, I had to take my headphones out. Now, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I know it's automatically created as a directory. Let me look at the. I might have added it to the git ignore when I uploaded it, just because it's not necessary. From what I'm reading on Stack Overflow, it said it used to be required for Python 2. whatever to 2.7, but it doesn't, it's not required for Python 3.3 onwards. So yeah, it's not in my samples because it doesn't, I guess yeah, well, any instances that I have of it in the sample is not, there's nothing in there.
Well, thanks for that.
Any other questions? Anybody else able to get their code running? Are there any other questions? Well, why don't I take up some of the silence by showing a couple things. I can show you what might happen if your Chrome driver isn't there.
Should we maybe make an announcement just because there are some folks still in the breakout rooms at the moment?
Oh, are there people in there?
Yeah, I mean, like you could just maybe, or I can actually do it. I'll just say that we're going to show a few more examples, but people can join back in when they are ready.
Okay. You're gonna ping the breakout rooms? Okay. Give them a minute.
Okay, I sent it, so I would just say like whenever you're ready.
I'll give them about 60 seconds if they're finishing something up.
You know, I was also thinking, because some folks might need to drop out, is it worth you posting the feedback form link already again in the chat?
Yeah, why don't I send that out right now? I'm adding one more question to it. Actually, I want people to upload their.
I will also post it in the Meetup channel and probably in our Slack channel too.
Those birds are still flying around over there, I remember.
We also have just like 10 minutes left if you want to continue what you would like to say.
Okay, why don't I do that? Okay, so one thing that might happen is if you don't have the Chrome driver or you don't have the correct path to the Chrome driver. For example, let's say I'm telling it to look in the vendor directory. Let's say I mix it up, I make something not work. One common error you might see is that it's telling you I can't access a Chrome driver. I don't have a way to communicate. Wow, that's a lot of. So right away it errors out. And it's telling me that something is happening with the WebDriver. So you'll see errors related to WebDriver. The problem with Selenium tests is that a lot of times it's hard to read those logs. It's hard to know what's going wrong. And a lot of times it just kicks you out if something is going wrong. Another thing that might happen is if you forgot to put your vendor in the right place. I'm going to move it up a directory. Then try to run my test. And it errored out right away. And it says WebDriver, and this is an exception you'll see a lot, your WebDriver exception. It says Chrome driver executable needs to be in path. And it's pretty much telling me I don't know where to find the Chrome driver, and that's why it's not looking. So if you see a Chrome driver exception, it means it's having trouble using the Chrome driver to communicate. While I'm doing this, I'm going to share the feedback form. So
yeah, that's a good question. Will we still have some time for a Q&A level?
Yeah, let me do one more thing and then we'll do some Q&A. Okay, so the last thing I want to do is point out that we do not have an actual test yet. We've done some things and we clicked on the login form, but to make it a true test, we want to make sure that we got to where we got to where we wanted to be. We want to make sure we logged in. The way that this test is going to do it is it's going to look for this thing called flash or flash success. So the last thing you might want to do is go into 2.07 and check, hey, were we actually successfully able to log in? And the only thing you need to change to make this a real live test is to add an assertion to the end of it. And essentially this assertion is just saying, hey, is that success banner displayed showing me that I was able to log in? So it does the same thing it did before, but this time it actually checked out that, hey, this thing that we're looking for actually happened. So to wrap it up, today we went through essentially the to-dos, the not fluffy stuff. There's stuff to read, there's stuff to learn about, but 1.05 and 1.06 help you get set up on training.saucelabs.com. 2.05, 2.06, 2.07 should get you to where, to what we demonstrated today. I'm going to ask that you take a survey, and the survey just has some feedback for you. Hey, did I understand those things? It has some multiple choice questions for you to see if you understand the concepts. And then there's a survey. There's a survey on the second page. It'll give you feedback. It'll tell you what's right, what's wrong. You can upload a copy of your test file, and then there's a survey on the next file or on the next page telling you, okay, what you're feeling about the workshop. So if you guys could fill that out, I'd appreciate it. And now we can open it up for some questions. Common errors.
First and foremost, very awesome. So Darcy has an awesome question, which is, could you maybe walk us through some common errors when you first started working with Selenium, and what are the helpful resources you use to solve that?
So one of the biggest problems that I've run into over and over and over again is the driver. If you want to test on Chrome driver, my browser would update automatically and I wouldn't know that. And then I would open up an old test and my test would start failing when I ran it on my local machine. There's some things you can use to do that. What I would really recommend is if you look at module 4, it's if you run Selenium and Python tests on Sauce Labs, you don't need to worry about installing drivers. Sauce Labs takes care of that for you. All you have to do is pass some capabilities to Sauce Lab and say, I want it on this platform and in this browser and this browser version. Some other common problems are it's hard to understand why your test is failing. What happens is sometimes if it can't find elements, it will tell you it's failing out, but it might just be that the page is taking a long time to send the request. Let's look at what, in this example, I'm looking for the wrong thing. This doesn't exist, the bitten class or CSS selector doesn't exist on the page. Quick tip, scroll to the very top of where your errors are and it will probably give you the best information. It tells me right here, you know, driver get, it was able to do all these things and this is the breakpoint. You can also use breakpoints on these to see, hey, which part of these work, debug these, you know, what did work, what didn't work. And another hard thing to do is Selenium Locators. So Selenium Locators can be notoriously difficult to use. There's a good little section on how you find locators and how you can test the locators in the inspector in your browser before you actually put them into your test. Any other questions?
I have a question actually, which I'd love to ask. Is there any tooling that you've come across specifically around like accessibility that can be combined with this?
Yeah, I think actually Sauce Labs is creating a feature for accessibility testing. Right now it's not implemented, but it's supposed to be able, if you put a certain capability in the test, it's supposed to be able to give you a score for your accessibility. But it's not released yet. It's just on the product roadmap.
Because I think that's quite interesting when you think about it in comparison to like manual testing, where you have you have to have all these devices, and you can think about some of the different types of accessibility and like, you know, situational circumstances of like, you know, if someone is carrying lots of things or they've hurt their arm and can't only use one hand or so forth. I wonder, because I imagine like the kind of score will probably be based around the Lighthouse style thing that Chrome already have.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. There's a Chrome Lighthouse, and we already use that for performance testing. So.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Yeah, very cool.
One more time, I'm going to share the Google form.
So yeah, I think there were some folks that didn't quite get to the end, but like I said before, don't worry about it. You can keep working through the tutorial, and if you require some extra support, just reach out on Slack. There's lots of friendly folks in the Slack who are more than willing to help you. And please do take a minute just to fill in that form and give Lindsay some feedback. Like, I mean, thanks so much for joining us today. It's a super interesting topic. There's clearly a lot more to go into it than what we've touched upon today. So yeah, please give her some feedback and let her know what you loved, any things that you were missing, and then maybe we can run another workshop.
That was definitely lovely. And if there's no other questions, I will send an email with both PyLadies form and Lindsay's form. Remember that Lindsay is not only like a survey, it's actually a super nice quiz. And the first time I did it, I was like, I would just do it, will I not pay much attention? Because oh, those are hard questions. Like it's where our learning actually goes when you put attention and oh, it's a problem. So it's really good for the learning journey. And I want to super thank you everyone that came, that share this moment, and all the coaches that are here volunteering their time to be nice and pushing us to have a nice community. And of course to Victoria and Lindsay to taking the time to prepare the material and sharing that knowledge with us. Super highly appreciated. And so I see you next time.
Yep, and feel free to email me with any questions. Find me on Slack. I'm more than happy to help you poke through anything, but I'll probably ask you for a screenshot. So.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for joining. Bye.
I think I have to leave my balcony. It's starting to get cold and very dark.
Yeah, you really, well, it was a nice day. You got the most out of it.
Cool. So get rest, you all. It's very late.
Yeah, looking forward to the next time.
Good night.
Thanks for having me, Paloma.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paloma.